Greetings, brothers and sisters. I am your lecturer for today, Sister Ebony Stevenson. Welcome to our Toma Nations weekly Sunday worship service located live here in Chicago, Illinois at 616 East 71st Street in the Grand Crossing community. Come and be fed by God's messengers. I am going to first start with our opening. In the name of the eternal divine spirit, the one that causes all that exists to exist, the one that is self existent, the one who directs the sonships of millions and trillions of years, and the one who made time the seed of the universe, known among the ancient Kemites as Amun Ra and Aten, among the Hebrews as Ansal, Yahweh, and Elohim, among the Christians as Lord, God, and Jehovah, among the Muslims and Islamic world as Allah, the one God, and among the Rastafarians as Jah, Rastafari. I bear witness that all of these names refer to the same one, eternal divine spirit, and it is to that essence whom I give reverence and to whom I submit. I boldly proclaim that we, the descendants of those Black men and women who survived the transatlantic slave trade, are the Lost 13th tribe, born here in North America, and we are of a Nubian Kemetic lineage. The blood of all the nations of the earth flow through our veins. I greet you in the ancient yet holy words of our forefathers of peace, Hotep, Shalom, Assalamu alaikum, Habaragani, Alafia, and Ashe. Peace, peace, brothers and sisters. The name of my lecture today is titled Buying Black Saves Lives. Now, when you hear that term, what does that invoke in your mind? Today, I'm going to go over some issues that are plaguing us in the Black communities of America, and then I'm going to close out with solutions. If you enjoy what you hear today, or you have been watching our previous lectures, if you would like more information about the Toma Nation, how you can join us here live at our headquarters, or how you can get any of our other lectures, please feel free to give us a call or text us at 773-846-9031. Okay, so first, when I start this out, it's going to be a lot of information. But like I said, if you want this lecture in a PDF format, please do feel free to contact us directly. So when we talk about the issue, Buying Black Save Lives, it can mean a lot of different things to different people. But when I came up with this lecture, or when the creator gave me the inspiration for this lecture, it relates to me being the president of the United Black American Progress Association and the new campaign that we launched last Sunday at our banquet, which is starting to collect the receipts from all the Black businesses that we are spending our money with. So if you would like to join us on that campaign, do feel free to give us a call or text us at 773-846-3091. Now, when you talk about the concept of buying Black, saving lives, it's not just about recording how much money that we are spending locally or nationally with Black-owned businesses. It's also about us starting to take responsibility for the issues that are going on in our community. If this election is not teaching us anything, that no matter who wins or who loses, nobody is going to be parachuting in our community in a long golden white dress with some long blonde hair to come and save us. That's not going to happen. We are responsible for the conditions of our communities, and until we make the decision to change them for the better, they're going to continue to decline. Now, when we say buying Black saves lives, that also means that when you talk about taking responsibility for the conditions of our community, it also means taking responsibility for where you're spending your money. I'm going to share some details with you. And I'm bookmarking all of these sources where I've got this information from. So if you would like the links to this, feel free to give us a text or a phone call. So when we talk about Black incarceration, we know that Black people are the most incarcerated people in this country. I believe our minister even mentioned it in a lecture about how, due to the Constitution, that chattel slavery is still legal in this country if you are convicted of a crime. And we know that in this prison system, this prison industrial complex here in America, that Black people make up the majority of the people in prison, but we're still only a small percentage of the population of the United States. So we're disproportionately represented in the US prison system, and that's by design. Now, when we talk about Black people as a whole being in the prison system of the US, let's break out a certain population of people within the Black population, Black youth. Now, when I went to go look this up, it said that in America, so think about this. So some things you got to use common sense and you got to use your mind for it to connect the dots. So when you start to try to look up how many Black youth are incarcerated in America, especially for nonviolent crimes, some of the numbers are different. But when you look up how many youth in America total are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses, it says that in 2011, 75% of youth incarcerated in the United States were for nonviolent offenses. So if 75% of the youth incarcerated in the United States were for nonviolent offenses, and I just stated that Black people disproportionately represent the majority of the people incarcerated in America, so you can make the connection that there are a lot of Black youth who are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses in states across this country. And so when we look at, race and incarceration, Black youth are more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. In 2021, Black youth were 4.7 times more likely, almost 5% more likely to be placed in juvenile facilities than white youth. Black youth are almost 3 times more likely to be arrested than white youth. And Black youth are involved in 52% of juvenile arrests for violent crimes, while white youth only make up 45% of the arrests. Does that mean that Black youth are more violent than white youth? No, it is not. We know that the history of Caucasians on the planet will show you who's more violent than who, but that's not my subject for today. What we're going to talk about is, why are those Black youth more likely to be incarcerated than white youth? Now, when you talk about racial disparities in incarceration among Black youth, what is a couple things that happens? Black youth are more likely to be detained upon arrest. We've seen that plenty of times, especially here in Chicago. That's even if they get arrested at all. Black youth are more likely to receive harsher sanctions as they move through the criminal justice system. Now, the reason why I am bringing up Black youth in incarceration when I'm talking about buying Black saves lives, when I just stated that the majority of Black youth are incarcerated due to nonviolent offenses, well, when you connect living in poverty to crime, there is a glaring connection. When I used to do court support for young people, I was in court plenty of times when I saw young people getting felonies for theft. Now, I remember one of the most glaring examples was I was at the police station in Roseland, and we were in court, and there was a young guy there, and he was arrested for stealing food out of a Food 4 Less. Now, you can tell in the young man's demeanor when he talked about what was happening, he stole that food because he was hungry. And so when we talk about poverty, how many youth are committing crimes due to poverty? And they had the loss prevention person for Food 4 Less, who this is the everyday occurrence here in Chicago when you go to court support. And to actually charge someone with a felony for stealing food in supposedly one of the richest countries in America shows you where our priorities are. Why are Black youth spending more time in prison than anybody else? This is by design. This is that diabolical plan to exterminate us off the face of the planet, because if they aren't killing us, they're incarcerating us. And when you're incarcerated, what did I just say? Then it's legal for you to be a chattel slave, because you're a slave of the United States of America, because this is based off of the 13th Amendment and their constitution that they created. And so when we talk about slavery, slavery is something in the past. No, slavery is something that Black communities are affected by every day. What happens when these young people come back home, when they are returning citizen and they have that stain on their record, and it's hard for them to get a job? It's hard for them to find a place to stay. And so what happens? They wind up going back to the prison system, because they can't support themselves due to what? You're putting them back in the same conditions that created the poverty in the first place. And so I know I said a lot, and many points of what I said can be a lecture within itself, but I'm going to continue on. And if you like what you're hearing, please feel free to drop us a comment live on Facebook or in YouTube. And if you would like a part 2 of this lecture, please feel free to let us know. So as we continue this conversation about Black youth, let's also talk about what I just mentioned about poverty and the connection to crime. See, there is a theory called the economic deprivation theory. And what it states is that it describes economic inequality. So when we talk about Black people and economics here in America, it's what Dr. Webb Evans, our ancestor Dr. Webb Evans, who founded the United Black American Progress Association, is basically what he said when he talked about how Black people are on the economic bottom or below the economic bottom in this country. That's related to the economic deprivation theory, because it describes economic inequality and lack of resources. So when you think about Black communities in the inner cities of America or Black communities in rural America, when you look at places like Mississippi, who have cities or towns that are some of the poorest in the country, when you talk about the lack of resources, a lack of resources is a driving factor for crime. It says individuals who experience poverty or relative deprivation in disadvantaged communities exhibit increased criminal behavior to deal with perceived social and economic injustices. And some of them are not perceived. I just gave you the example of the young man who I witnessed personally, who was in the store stealing because he didn't have food, because he was hungry. And so we're all human. I'm not going to say we all, some of us are human beings, but I'm talking to you Black people. So we're all human beings. So when we talk about you being in a community where almost all of the businesses are owned by people who don't look like you, can you imagine being somewhere and being hungry, and then your last resort is to go inside of a store and steal? I remember another example. I was in Hyde Park with one of my foster children who I had guardianship of, and we were coming out of T-Mobile, and there was a Black man. No, it was actually Sprint at the time. There was a Black man sitting on the ground. It was hot outside. And he wasn't asking people to give him money. He was just begging for someone to buy him food. And you can look in his eyes and tell that he was hungry. And so when we talk about poverty, we can go anywhere in Chicago and look at how Black people are affected by poverty. And let's not even get into this conversation about how resources are being spent in our city when you compare the resources that are being given to migrants and the resources that are being given to Black residents whose ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears are seeped into the soil of this country. We can go anywhere from Lakeshore Drive all the way to Inglewood, all the way west. We can go under the viaducts. We can go to the bus stops. We can go ride the red line, and you can see the impact of poverty in Black people here in Chicago. And when we talk about poverty and Black people in this country, we know that this isn't only happening to Chicago. We know it's happening in Detroit, in DC, in Los Angeles, in Houston, and all these places that have majority Black populations. There is a huge impact of poverty. And so when you talk about all those things that relate to poverty, let's also talk about unemployment or low pay. For an individual or family who relies on a monthly income, unemployment is a critical loss. A layoff or inability to find work causes financial strain, which can make it difficult to afford living necessities. We see this every day in our community. In addition, if an individual works for low wages, they cannot afford rent, groceries, or other basic necessities. This is called the strain theory applies here, as individuals aren't able to make ends meet or reach their goals, so they look to criminal activity as a last resort. Once again, when we talk about these connections to violence in our community, so many of them are related to poverty. And so, going on with my theme of Buying Black Saves Lives, I want to talk to you a little bit about Black businesses. And I know that my time is approaching and I'm not going to get through everything that I had. But like I said, if you would like a part 2 of this lecture, please feel free to drop us a comment in the chat if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, and maybe we'll give you a part 2. So in America, Black-owned businesses contribute billions of dollars to the U.S. economy. Not millions of dollars, billions of dollars. In 2021, Black business generated $206 billion in revenue to the U.S. economy. Also in 2021, guess how many people that Black businesses employed? Take a guess. Do you think it's above 500,000 or below 500,000? If you guess above 500,000, you are correct. Black-owned businesses employed over 1.4 million people in 2021. Let's talk about payroll. Black-owned businesses generated $42.2 billion in annual payroll in 2021. $42.2 billion being paid out to employees by Black-owned businesses. That is not a small number at all. So when we talk about how hard it is to start a business for Black people, how hard it is to sustain a business for Black people, we see Black businesses going out of business as soon as they come into business. As soon as they start a business, you turn around and you're like, oh, I want to spend my money with this business. They close their doors. Because it is hard to start a business here in this country, and it's hard to sustain a business, especially for Black people, because we know that we still face structural disadvantages compared to white-owned businesses. We know we're more likely to be non-employer firms such as sole proprietorships. In 2019, only 4% of Black-owned businesses were employer firms compared to 19% of white-owned firms. Now, that means LLCs and corporations. So when we talk about us buying Black to save lives, it's all connected to how do we take the resources that we already have, that we're already spending, to convert them to things that are going to help our community and thus save the lives of people in our community. That's a real conversation. So I actually did some research. So when I go back to what I stated before about the violence in Black communities, and especially I'm talking to those of you who are here in Chicago, where we are located here, our headquarters, Toma Nation. So when we talk about the rising rates of violence, do we think that this scenario that we see where the government decides to, hey, violence is a problem, so we're going to put together a pool of money and we're going to send it to those cities, or we're going to send it to those communities that are facing this violence, and that's going to help decrease the violence? Well, if that solution that the government is giving us, if that solution that these foundations are giving us is working, then why in almost every major city in this country that Black people spend so much time dodging many missiles as they're sitting at their dining table? It was just a woman who got shot when she was changing her bed the other day that a bullet came into her house. This isn't fantasy. This is an everyday occurrence that we have to sit here and dodge many missiles that are shot from these automatic weapons of mass destruction that are being distributed in our communities by entities that don't want to see us persevere, that have, like I said, that's connected to our 13 points of what we believe and know, that have a diabolical objective to exterminate dark people off the face of the planet through the act of genocide. This thing that we're experiencing with these high rates of violence is not anything new. We know that there was high rates of gun violence during the 90s. But when we talk about how this all connects to buying Black Save Lives, I just gave you examples of what it means about how some of these issues are connected to poverty. And so let's go back to what I was just saying about when the government makes a decision to pour out millions of dollars. Now, I just pulled this up, and you know, like our minister and founder, Minister Raheem Kassed-Atta says, you don't have to believe anything that I'm saying right now. You can go online and do the research yourself. Google is free. All you have to do is Google some of the topics that I have talked about, and then articles will come up, documents will come up, and it will back up everything that I'm saying. So when we talk about this money that's pouring in our community that's supposed to decrease violence. So say, for example, the federal government. The federal government is giving $4 million in funding to Chicago to stop the violence. This isn't the first time that the federal government has given this money to stop violence. Do you think that it's having an effect? Cook County in 2022 gave $75 million to be distributed over 3 years, right? So $75 million poured into Cook County. And I'm just going to keep it real. I'm about to name some names. And if you one of these organizations that I'm about to name your name and you got a problem with it, we're located at 616 East 71st Street. These organizations should give an account about how they're spending this money and if the plans that they are implementing is actually decreasing the violence. Because every day we turn on the news, there's been another shooting. Every weekend, there's mass shootings. There's shootings every single day that no time is safe. There's shootings in the early morning. There's shootings in the afternoon. There's shootings in the evening. It doesn't matter where we are or what time it is, that nobody is safe. So say, for example, during this time, and these were awarded starting in the summer of 2022. Books Over Balls got $1,458,739.03. Brighton Park Neighborhood Council got, I'm not going to say the whole amount. I'm just going to start because I know my time is coming. So I'm gonna round the numbers out. Got a little over $2 million. Build Inc. got $15 million. Catholic Bishop School of Chicago, which is St. Savannah, got $1.4 million. Children's Reach got $1.4 million. Some of these organizations I never even heard of. Firebird Community Arts got $661,000. Firehouse Community Arts Center got $1.4 million. Friends of Children got $1.4 million. Iman got $1.5 million. Kids Above All Illinois got $4.3 million. Lawrence Hall, who we are familiar with, which will be a whole lecture within itself, got $1.2 million. Manufacturing Renaissance got $1.2 million. Metropolitan Family Services got $15 million. I'm going to some of the larger ones. New Moms Inc. got $1.4 million. Project Simeon, Hip Hop Detox got $1.4 million. Reflections Foundation got $1.2 million. Restoring the Path got $1.5 million. Roseland Ceasefire Project got $4 million. St. Anthony Hospital got $3 million. St. Sinai Community Institute got $1.4 million. Sunshine Gospel Ministries, located in the Woodlawn community, got $1.4 million. Teamwork Inglewood got $1.4 million. Westside Health Authority got $1.4 million. And Youth Crossroads Inc. got $1.5 million. That first cycle of those grants adds up to $75,872,000. $75,872,000. Those are all related to reducing violence. Do you think that $75 million is having an impact in your community? I live in Chatham. I hear gunshots almost every day. There's so much crime that happens in Chatham that we don't know which direction the gunshots are coming from. These mini missiles of mass destruction. So when I just named those organizations, if you live in a neighborhood where one of those organizations resides, do you think that $75 million is having an impact in your community? See, this is the thing when we talk about what my lecture title of Buying Black Save Lives, when you have outside entities who are making decisions about what they fund and what they don't fund. And if we talk about, we had rising rates of gun violence since the 90s, and we had ceasefire and cure violence and all these other entities, what kind of true impact are these organizations and these grant money is providing to our communities? Because when you look at just these organizations saying, oh, we're going to employ 100 youth for 10 hours a week for 6 weeks, or 15 hours a week for 10 weeks, or we're going to employ youth during the summer. Is that having an impact on decreasing the violence in our community? Or is it like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, putting a Band-Aid on a gaping bullet wound? Is it just slowing the blood flow? Because if these entities, if these organizations, if this grant money was actually doing something, we would see an improvement. And right now, I don't know about you, Black brothers and sisters, but I'm not seeing the improvement. And I know I'm already at time. I'm going to go 5 minutes over just so I can finish these final points. And then, like I said, if you would like a part 2 of this lecture, do feel free to drop us a comment live on Facebook or YouTube, or shoot us a text message at 773-846-3091. So when we talk about what I said before about there's so much hoopla around this 2024 presidential election, Kamala versus Trump, the harlot versus the beast, no matter what you call them, nobody is going to save us. How is this presidential election going to change what's going on in our community? Is the presidential election going to have an impact on the high rates of violence in our community? Is the presidential election going to have an impact on the high rates of Black homelessness in our community that I already mentioned? You can go anytime, especially during the AM, and ride the red line and see the red line be full of majority Black people sleeping on the train, but lots of Black youth sleeping on the train because they don't have anywhere to go. And so when we have these outside entities who are making these decisions, this is the result. So when we talk about Buying Black Saving Lives and us standing up for our communities and starting to take responsibility for the conditions of our communities, that's related to Buying Black. Now, what is that connection? So when you talk about what I just said about outside entities and grants and all of these things coming in our community, what would happen if we decided that, hey, we're going to get together and we're not going to wait on the government to come and pour these grant funds in our community? We're not going to wait on the federal government. We're not going to wait on the state. We're not going to wait on Cook County. We're not going to wait on the city of Chicago. As Black people who live in these communities, as Black people whose children go to school in these communities, and as Black people who work in these communities, we're going to start to take responsibility for our own communities. And so when we talk about here at TOMA, we often use the term that we're at war. And we know that we're on war on different levels. We're on war on a spiritual level, we're on war on a physical level, and on a mental level, because we know that these mindsets have been forced upon us by our enemy. But those different levels of warfare can be all lectures within themselves. But I want to mention something about economic warfare, and then you'll see where I'm going with this, because this is such a weighty topic that I can go on, but I'm going to be ending in 3 minutes. So what is economic warfare? Economic warfare is a strategy that's used to weaken an adversary's economy through economic means, such as sanctions, boycotts, or trade embargoes. The goal is to reduce the enemy's political and military power or to force them to change their behavior. Economic warfare is often used as a coercive tactic to precede military force in the hopes of preventing or shortening a war. Now, we know usually when you think of economic warfare, you think about wars. You think about the Ukrainian war, or the war between Palestine and Israel, or the Afghanistan war, or any of the wars happening in continental Africa. Now, when you talk about economic warfare, we can relate this to Black communities all across urban America and also Black communities in rural America. When you go into a community and you see businesses owned by people of the community or by the majority race of the people in that community, that makes sense. Imagine going to Chinatown and the majority of the business were owned by Blacks or Latinos or Arabs. Does that make sense? It doesn't. But why, when you go in Black communities, the majority of the businesses are owned by people who don't look like us. They're owned by corporations. They're owned by Arabs. They're owned by Latinos. They're owned by Asians. All of these people, all they do is take that money out of our community and go pour it into their communities. This is why their communities are thriving and our communities are in a constant state of decline, because our dollar doesn't circulate in our community. And circulating the dollar in your own community is so important, because it's just like the blood flow in your body. If your blood flow gets cut off, if your circulation gets cut off, then you what? You die. And so that's what happened. This is what's happening to Black communities across America, because our dollar isn't circulating. And so our communities are dying. Our communities are in a constant state of decline. And if it wasn't for the pouring in of grants or government support, no matter what level of government, the state of decline would be even worse, because once again, we don't take responsibility for our own communities. And so I'm going to close out with this. I did a little bit of mathematics, and this is what I came up with. So when we talk about buying Black Save Lives, I told you how much money Black businesses contribute to the economy. I told you how much money in payroll Black businesses did in 2021. So let's say if we make the decision in Black communities across this country to say, hey, we're gonna start taking responsibility for the conditions in our community. We know that the high Black unemployment rate, the high Black unemployment rates for Black youth contributes to the rising rates of violence in the community. I already gave you the theories and the stats, the statistics that support what I'm saying. So let's say, for example, if we make the decision that a lot of people are familiar with the definition or the theme of tithes, right? Tithes is 10%, right? It's a part of the universal law. A lot of religions practice tithes, where they give 10% of what they earn back to their religious institution or wherever they worship or whatever they believe in, right? And so let's use the example of tithes and say, if in cities that had large Black communities, if 10% of those communities decided to take a stance that they were going to use their resources, they were going to pull their resources, buying Black, to buy from Black-owned businesses, that if they decided that 10% of the Black people in those cities or towns would spend $100 with the Black-owned businesses. It doesn't matter if you decided to spend the money you spend on essentials. Everyone has to use toilet paper. Hopefully, some of us use paper towels. Everyone uses soap or body wash or things like that. That stuff adds up. And when you look at inflation and stuff, the cost of things is going higher. Everyone is using some kind of laundry detergent, whether it's powdered or liquid form. Everyone is buying food. We have Black businesses in all of these categories. So if 10% of these communities, cities or towns that have large Black populations decided to spend $100 with Black businesses, I just want to give you a couple of numbers of what that would generate and the impact that would have going on with the theme of buying Black Save Lives. Now in Chicago, we have an estimated 784,000 Black people. Now, if 10% of those Black people decided to spend $100 with Black-owned businesses, that would generate $7,840,000. If you go back to what I stated about the connection between poverty and violence and focusing on Black youth, that money is enough to hire 2,305 youth at $20 an hour for 40 hours a week. That means that you would give those youth full-time jobs where they will make above a living wage. And we know that the data shows when youth are able to get gainfully employed, not just throwing them a couple hour a week job, but when they're getting full-time jobs and they're actually able to make a living wage to support themselves and their families, because we have a lot of youth who are not just supporting themselves with the income that they make, they're also contributing to their households. That helps reduce the violence because you're reducing the effects of poverty. So that's Chicago. Imagine if New York did the same thing. It's 2 million Black people in New York. If 10% of those 2 million decided to do what I just mentioned, spending $100 with Black-owned businesses, that would generate $20 million and hire almost 6,000 youth in New York. If Los Angeles did the same thing, it would generate $3 million, hiring almost 1,000 youth. If Detroit did it, it would generate almost $5 million, hiring almost 1,500 youth. If Philadelphia did it, these are all cities with large Black populations, it would generate $6,390,000, which will hire almost 2,000 youth. Heck, and the South, I didn't forget y'all. If Houston did it, it would generate $5 million, which would hire a little over 1,500 youth. Now imagine if we had this mindset of doing for self and pooling our resources to start to save our youth, save our communities, and have an impact that's actually positive and not wait on the Democrats or Republicans to come and parachute in our community to save us, then we can actually start to see some change that we did ourselves. Because at the end of the day, nobody is coming to save us. And it's up to us to start to take responsibility for the conditions of our community and start to implement the blueprints that have already been left to us by ancestors such as Dr. Webb Evans, that buying Black can save lives. And that's the only way that we can truly get off the economic bottom in this country. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Sunday worship service here at the Toma Nation headquarters at 616 East 71st Street. If you have enjoyed what you have heard today, please feel free to drop us a comment live on YouTube or Facebook. And then also, if you would like more information about today's lecture or previous lectures, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us a text at 773-846-3091. Black Power, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much for joining us.